Hello, I'm John from Renovation Shetland, and I'd like to welcome you to this, which is the fifth and final part of our Spooky Shetland series for 2020. Throughout this series we've been delving into Shetland's history, folklore and traditions in the build-up towards Halloween. As you can see, I've managed to escape from the Trouty now, and I've found myself in the wilds of Yell. And today we're going to be exploring the ruins of Windhouse here behind me, which is far and away Shetland's most haunted house, and it's also allegedly one of the most haunted in all of the British Isles. Today we're going to look at some of the facts and the history of this imposing ruin, and we'll also go into some of the scary and frankly quite grisly tales that have grown to surround this building. So let's go in and take a closer look, if you're brave enough. Situated at the head of Whalefirth, which is just down to the right here, Whalefirth combined with Rayfirth, or Mid-Yelvo, which is just down on this side over here, almost chop the island of Yell in half. And Windhouse was built here on this site in 1707 originally, but the house was largely rebuilt and remodelled in 1885. The remains of an earlier house, which is believed to date from the 1600s, lie slightly further up the hill, up behind the house that's here now. Allegedly, this original house was owned by a series of pretty nasty men, quite frankly, and there are stories of beatings and assaults and even a hanging, which are said to have taken place there. The original house was subsequently knocked down and moved and reconstructed slightly down the hill on the site of the current house here behind me. Even this is a little bit strange though. The site of the current house is on top of the site of a medieval chapel and graveyard, and skeletons were dug up here recently, more on those shortly, which have been dated to the 13th and the 14th centuries. This chapel is associated with the Iron Age broch, which sits on the site as well. That seems to have been a reasonably common feature of the early church in sort of medieval Shetland, and similar examples of this situation of a church on a broch site can be seen at Cullisborough in Bressa, Mail in Conisborough, and also at Upper Scallowa as well, which has also been in the news recently. In addition, there's also a Neolithic burial cairn just down the hill from the site as well, so it's almost no wonder that this place is thought to be haunted. The Ha, or the Laird's house here, was abandoned in the 1920s eventually, and over the last 100 or so years it's fallen into a state of disrepair. Despite this, in 2002 it was bought by a couple from England who had plans to renovate it, although eventually no work was actually done by them to the house. But again in 2016 the house went up for sale, it was bought. In 2017 some survey work was undertaken as part of the restoration plans for the new owners, which led to the discovery of those two skeletons that I've mentioned. And in March of this year, so that's 2020, a planning application was submitted for permission to alter and to work on this Grade C listed building as it is, to remove some of the dormer windows from the upper floors just up here, and also to stabilise the existing windows you can see behind me here, and the door frame as well, which you can also see. So there is work being undertaken on the house now by these new owners. So the stories of ghosts and hauntings here at Windhouse go back a very, very long time, although no doubt they've been added to and embellished and exaggerated over the years. That said, a young woman named Katie Sutherland, who lived here at Windhouse with her family, received a postcard in August 1906, which said, and I quote, "I hope the ghost isn't frightening you too much." I'm not sure exactly which ghost this refers to, as there are several possible candidates. So we'll go through those in turn now and try and work out which one it might be. So our first candidate is known as the Lady in Silk, and it's thought that she was either a housekeeper here or possibly the mistress of the laird, or maybe both, who knows. But it's said that she met her untimely demise by falling down the stairs and breaking her neck. Adding credence to this story is the fact that a skeleton was found buried at the bottom of the steps just underneath the floorboards. She gets her name from the rustling sound that her silk dress and petticoats make as she moves, and she has been seen several times turning in a circle 3 times at the top of the stairs before letting out a sigh and disappearing. Our second possibility is known as the Tall Man. Unsurprisingly, this ghost is a tall man who wears a top hat and a long black coat, and he's been seen several times walking along this terraced area in front of the house before turning and going through the wall into the building. The identity of this ghost remains unknown, however. There are vague stories of a tax collector who disappeared after coming to the house at some point in the past, and there are also better substantiated press reports from 1887 which record a skeleton of a large or tall man who was discovered during renovations and drainage works to the back of the house at that time. There was no evidence of a coffin found there whatsoever, and the burial was just a few inches beneath the surface of the ground, and the skeleton itself measured over 6 feet tall, but was a genuinely very tall man. That kind of gave rise to rumours that this had been a murder, or there was some suspicion of foul play, although there was no evidence of that found on the body itself. The skeleton was found with its arms folded across its chest, kind of in the usual or traditional way. This isn't the first time I've mentioned skeletons being dug up here. I did so in the introduction as well. I'll bring those back up now again. So in 2017, as some survey work was being undertaken here for the new owner's renovation plans, a couple of skeletons were discovered. So those 2 skeletons were discovered right beside the house here, both buried a very short distance below the ground, about 6 inches or so. These have both been dated to the 13th or 14th centuries, and they belong to the medieval churchyard which lies beneath the house that I've mentioned before. I'd wager that the skeleton found in the 1880s also belongs to that same time period, so back to 13th, 14th century. So the identity of our ghost in the top hat remains a mystery still. A third possibility for the postcard ghost is that of a servant girl who is often seen climbing an invisible set of steps within the house, presumably which belonged to the earlier building prior to the renovations of the 1880s. There are a number of other stories of apparitions and ghosts and strange goings on here in the house as well. One of the more prevalent ones that I remember from my childhood, I think I first heard it on a school trip to Yale when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, was that there is a ghost dog here, which has also been seen several times, and there are loads of reports of hearing it howling and barking in the night as well. I don't know if you can hear in the background, but maybe there. There is a dog in a nearby house barking away, and I strongly suspect that the ghost dog barking might just be a neighbour's one instead. One family who used to reside here in the house would encounter bone-chilling cold spots, even in areas where there were no drafts coming through, which they attributed to some kind of spirits or goings-on. And they also often heard disembodied voices, laughter and footsteps coming from empty rooms in the house, particularly in the bedrooms. They also said there was one bedroom that people just refused to go into, especially after a maid had gone in to make the bed in that room, but every time she tried to make the bed, she heard a strange voice laughing at her every time she tried to do it, and she ended up running away as a result. There are also several reports of lights flashing on and off in the windows and the whole house lighting up, even though it has no electricity to it and never has done. There's also the occurrence of a spirit or an apparition rising out of an old sea chest which used to sit in the hallway of the house here. Apparently the story goes that the son of the household was overcome by his curiosity surrounding this chest, and he just had to try and open it to see what was inside. But he found that it was locked, and so he was trying to kind of prise it open. And as he was doing this, a strange mist began to rise out of one of the corners of the chest, and rose up and formed a small sort of column of cloud above the box. And then this cloud then kind of turned into the form of a man, which stayed for a few seconds before it all disappeared back down into the same corner of the chest that it had risen up from. And I'm led to believe that the boy never tried to get inside it ever again after that. In the early 1900s, two men were tasked with replacing a window in the house here, and in doing so they had to remove a nailed up shutter. As they did this and took the shutter away, a small bundle fell out from behind it onto the floor, and after a quick examination they discovered that it was an infant child's skeleton wrapped up in a sheepskin. I would imagine this would have been an unwanted baby, for lack of a better term, whether born by a servant girl or even a daughter of the household, and it had to be got rid of, again for lack of a better phrase, for some reason or another. Whatever the reasons behind this, it's no doubt an absolutely tragic tale and outcome, which would have been heartbreaking for obviously the mother of the child, but no doubt for more people beyond that as well. It really is a terribly sad story associated with the house here. In addition to all of the ghosts and the hauntings and things that we've looked at so far, there are a couple of stories which have become much more widely known throughout Shetland and beyond. So I'll tell those now. The year was 1801 and some renovation work was planned for the original building here at Windhouse. And a group of 20 men were shipped in from the mainland to actually carry out this building work. And they arrived on the packet boat, the mail boat, in mid-Yale. One particularly observant local, a man noted and renowned for his intellect and his honesty, made a count of these men, and there were indeed the full score of them who arrived into mid-Yale on the packet boat to come and carry out the building work here at Windhouse. These men were a rough, hard, ill-natured sort of guy. I suppose kind of what you'd imagine for an itinerant worker at the turn of the 19th century to be, really. In any case, it took them 2 years to complete the work here on the house and to finish off the renovations. When the men returned to Mid-Yale to be shipped south again, our observant local remarked that there were only 19 of them. But this was dismissed as absolute nonsense, hogwash. He was talking a load of dirt, and that all of the men had arrived, had departed again after the work had been done. This was true in a sense, although one of the band of 20 workers had departed in a somewhat different sense the night previously. On completion of the work here, the group of men celebrated with a big party and a lot of strong drink was taken. And unfortunately, as can happen when the drink is in, and especially in a group of hard, no-nonsense men, tensions began to rise between a couple of members of the group, and they fell into a fight with one another. The outcome of this fight was that one of the men had killed the other, and now there was a new dilemma: how to get rid of the body. It was decided that they were going to remove the front door, which was a big, heavy, stout door to the house, and lift up the heavy threshold stone that lay beneath it, as nobody would discover the body buried in under there. With the man's body packed in beneath the threshold and the door replaced, the workers departed the scene and departed Yale entirely, certain that their crime would go undiscovered and unpunished, although in time only the latter would prove to be true. A great many years later, when the house was owned by a Mr. Gordon, a man who was none too fond of the otherworldly occupants he shared his house with, but in any case, the threshold below the door had subsided to such a point that the wind and rain and snow would blow in underneath the door, and this simply wouldn't do. He got some local men in to make the repairs, and once the door had been removed again and the threshold lifted, they were shocked to find the skeleton of a large man had been packed down into the foundation. The bones were subsequently removed and given a proper burial, and from that moment on, the ghost of a large, rough man no longer haunted the house, as it had been said to do prior to that point. Arguably the most well-known story from here dates from around the 1850s and is that of the Windhouse Trout. Although it's nothing like the trouts we've discussed in parts 1 and 3 of this Spooky Shetland series, and in some versions of the story it's described more plainly as a ghost or a beast. In any case, it caused great upheaval in the house here in the form of tremors or eruptions, as they were called, and the walls would shake like an earthquake. Pictures would fall off the walls, the crockery and plates and things would fall off the tables, objects would come off the mantelpieces, all sorts of things like that. And these eruptions or tremors were especially violent on Christmas Eve. The family who lived here at the time were the Spences. They were a man and a wife and their 6 children, plus a few of the servants as well. And they lived many happy years here at Windhouse, despite the hauntings and the tremors and things like that went on. Although this was to change really quite dramatically and tragically one Christmas Eve. As the clock struck midnight from Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, the house was shaken by an incredibly violent eruption, much more strong than they'd ever experienced before up to that point. However, they all knew it would subside again in time, and when it did, they all slept soundly until the morning. The family rose for their Yule breakfast as usual, but upon realising the eldest son hadn't yet joined them, Mr. Spence sent a servant girl to go and wake the boy. A few moments later, the jolly mood of Christmas morning was shattered by a blood-curdling scream from the servant girl, and Mr. Spence rushed up the stairs to find out what the problem was, and he found her standing motionless at the entrance to the boy's room, and he peered cautiously past her, unsure of what he was to see. His eldest son and heir was lying still in his bed, white and dead. There were no signs of a struggle or any indications as to the loss of his life, but the whole family knew what the cause was. Despite this, the Spences continued to live here, traumatised but determined to carry on with their lives as best they could. The house still had its tremors and its eruptions, but none so violent as that which had taken their son on Christmas Eve. Although the family did begin to notice other strange goings on, there were footsteps in empty rooms, disembodied voices and sighs heard going up and down the stairs. And there was generally a malevolent air about the place, like something was lurking in the shadows and watching them. In the build-up towards Yule, the tremors began to increase both in their frequency and in their intensity. And once again, as the clock struck midnight from Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, the house was shaken by an incredibly violent tremor, as much as it had done the previous year. On this occasion, it was the eldest daughter who was found in her bed the next morning, lying pale and motionless, again with no signs of struggle or outward cause of her death. Still, the family continued to live here at Windhouse, but when a third child was taken the following Yule in the same way, in the same method, the Spences decided that they would not, could not and should not spend another Yule here at Windhouse, and so they made arrangements to stay with their cousins in Mid-Yell the following year instead. Another 12 months rolled around, and the weather on Christmas Eve was absolutely ferocious and wild, as Shetland winters can tend to be. And the servants were having trouble calming the horses that were required to transport the Spence family and their luggage the mile or so journey over to Mid-Yell. During this time, the family thought they would eat first and wait to see if the weather subsided a bit before setting out on their journey. And just as they were sitting down at the table and Mr. Spence was about to raise a toast to all of the family's health this Christmas, there came a loud, thundering knock at the door. Earlier that day, a ship had been wrecked on the west coast of Yell, with only 2 men surviving the wreck. They began to make their way overland, and even though they'd managed to escape from a watery grave, as they were searching for any sign of life or a home or habitation in which they could take refuge, they realised that terra firma could be just as wild and dangerous as the sea, and they decided that their best chance of survival was to split up, and in that way at least one of them would hope to find somewhere that they could shelter. One man ventured in a northward direction, and he was never seen or heard from again. The other man made his way south instead, and by chance he stumbled upon the front door of Windhouse. With the last of his remaining strength, the sailor knocked on the door. Mr. Spence rose tentatively from his seat, and he was unsure what he would discover on the other side of his door, knocking in this ungodly weather. But when he opened the door, he didn't expect to see a soaking wet sailor standing there. So he invited the man in, gave him some food and some dry clothes, and then he explained the situation to him, what was happening in the house, and that he and his family were departing for Mid-Yell, and that this young sailor should come with them. The sailor refused this offer, explaining that he was absolutely exhausted from his ordeal, and instead he asked if he could stay the night at Windhouse. And in any case, he didn't believe in ghosts or trouts, and he wasn't scared of them anyway. Instead, he asked for a bed, which he was granted at the back of the house here, in one of the servants' rooms. And he went to sleep, although he was warned that he should wake up before midnight. So the sailor slept for a couple of hours, and he woke around about 10:30, or at least that's what the clock on the wall chimed. And he got up then feeling really quite refreshed, even after only a couple of hours. It must have made all the difference after the day that he'd had. And so he went through into the drawing room, and he lit a candle, and he sat and he read a book. And he was kind of brought back from this adventure that he was reading by the clock again chiming, letting him know that it was 11:30. At this point, he went for a walk outside, and the weather had cleared quite dramatically, and instead the moon was shining quite high, quite bright, a full clear moon, casting its light across the surrounding hills here, and he was really quite taken aback by the serenity of the whole situation. He made his way back inside, and again he could see the moonlight coming in through the windows, casting bars of light across the floor. As the clock struck midnight, this whole scene changed and the darkness kind of enveloped the place. The moon was covered and no light came through at all. The candle mysteriously blew out, and then the tremors began and the house began to shake. The walls juddered, pictures fell off, items came off the mantelpiece, the clock fell off the wall and smashed on the floor. And the sailor thought, there's no way the house can survive this, the whole thing is going to rumble down around me. So he made his way back through the house, back to where the wood was being chopped, and he thought, no, I'm going to have to at least arm myself, I don't know what's coming here. He picked up the wood chopping axe and he steadied himself in a door frame. As he did this, the front door of the house burst open and this huge, giant black form appeared, and it raced through the house towards him. At this point, the sailor very much believed in spirits and ghosts and things of that nature, which he hadn't done previously. And instead, he found the fear rising in his throat and his heart was beating faster and faster and faster as this spectral form rushed towards him. Just before it reached him, he managed to dive out through the back door over behind me here and made his way around the corner of the house. This beast or this spectre followed him, and as it came around the corner he swung his axe back towards it, only to find that he missed. And so, pulling the axe back out of the wall, he chased the beast up the hill as it ran away from him. He gave chase, following the beast up the hill, but he found the more that he ran, the heavier the axe seemed to become in his hands. But eventually, he caught up with this spectre, this being, and with an almighty effort he managed to heave the axe up over his shoulder and bring it down with all his might. And this time, he found its target. He hammered straight through this being and pinned it into the ground on the hillside. As he did that, the darkness began to lift. The mist receded, the cloud began to lift again, the moonlight became much, much stronger, and he could see this form beginning to shrink and almost deflate, and it turned into an almost slug-like, slimy black mass there on the hillside, held in place by the axe which was hammered through into the ground. The Spencers returned the following morning and they found the sailor sleeping soundly in the bed that they'd arranged for him. And over breakfast he recounted his tale, what had happened, and in his excitement he brought them outside and he rushed ahead up the hill to find and show them the spot where he had slain the beast. When the family got there though, they saw the axe buried into the hillside, but there was nothing else there. A strange thing they did notice, however, was that the heather in the area had turned bright green rather than its usual kind of brownish purple hue. So what does the future hold in store for Windhouse? As I've said, the building came under new ownership in 2016. In 2017 some survey work was done and some initial archaeological excavation has taken place. Earlier this year the planning application went in for permission to refurb the listed building, and the stabilisation work has already taken place in some instances, as you can see with these window and door frames and some of the new brickwork that you can see behind me. So the new owners are taking an active role in renovating the house as they have planned to do. So in that respect it looks quite rosy almost in a way. Unfortunately the house is more or less completely ruined, and I'd imagine it'll be almost a takedown and rebuild job and start again entirely from scratch. And if that is the case, then there will almost certainly have to be a load of archaeological excavation that goes on here. If that's the case, I'd absolutely love to be involved in doing some of that work, but we'll see what progresses on that front in the future. I just hope that the new owners of the house here get on better, or get on well at least, with the other occupants that remain here, whether in spectral form or anything else. Hopefully, as the years pass, they can build a positive relationship with each other, and the house can return to the former glory that it once had. For those who are brave enough, it's also possible to stay kind of at Windhouse, or at least in the gatehouse for it. It's known as Windhouse Lodge, as you can see beside me there, and it's run as a camping boat by the Amenity Trust. It's really basic accommodation. It's kind of like a bunkhouse type situation. Hopefully in post-COVID times it'll reopen and people will be able to stay there again. So as I've said, this is the last video in our Spooky Shetland series, at least for 2020 anyway. I've really enjoyed making these videos. I hope you've enjoyed watching them, and hopefully you've learned a few things from them as well. If you have any thoughts on this series, or any ideas or suggestions for future videos and series that you'd like me to record for you, then let me know down in the comments. It's always good to hear from you. Also, don't forget to like and share this video wherever you can on any of your social media and things like that. And if you've enjoyed this and you want to keep up with the other video content that we produce, hit the subscribe button. It's just down in the corner down there, and ring the little bell as well. That way you'll stay notified and you won't miss any more videos from us. If you'd like to support me and Adventure Shetland in a monetary fashion, you can do so. I've included the links to the merchandise stores down in the description there, where you can get hoodies like this one, t-shirts. I've just released some brand new sew-on or iron-on patches featuring the Adventure Shetland logo as well. There are mugs, stickers, posters, all sorts of things on there, on the Teespring store if you want to have a look at some of those. And also there's the selfie store as well, which has all of the virtual tours that I've done, so you can see Shetland from wherever you happen to be in the world. And also I've got some headgear on there, so baseball caps in blue and grey, and also the Adventure Shetland neck gaiter, which might be a really useful face covering as we head into the winter as well. If you'd like to follow along and keep up with us on a day-to-day basis, you can do so. I've included all the social media links down in the description as well, along with a link to our website where you can find all our blogs and things like that, but also you can make tour inquiries if you're interested in doing a guided tour of Shetland with me. That's all from me today and for the Spooky Shetland series. I hope you have a safe but spooky Halloween. And all the best for now. I will catch you soon for more Shetland adventures. Cheers.